In the 1960s, India was a nation struggling to feed itself. Milk was scarce, farmers were poor, and rural communities had little power. Imagine being a small farmer with just one buffalo and one cow, barely able to survive. Now imagine those two animals helping change an entire nation's economy. One bold idea, connecting millions of farmers into a national cooperative system. The White Revolution did not just change milk production, it changed the future of a nation and the balance of power. The White Revolution was a turning point in Indian history because it revolutionized the dairy industry through cooperative ownership and modern technology while reforming rural economies, empowering farmers, and strengthening national food security by replacing exploitation with self-reliance.
For nearly 200 years, India lived under British colonial rule, which reshaped the country's economy and rural society. Before British control, India had thriving agricultural communities and major industries such as textiles. But colonial policies redirected India's economy to serve British interests. Indian raw materials were exported, local industries declined, and rural communities were pushed into deep poverty. Farmers were pressured to grow cash crops rather than food, which weakened nutrition and increased dependence on unstable markets. When India gained independence in 1947, the new nation inherited an economy that was fragile, unequal, and overwhelmingly rural. More than 70% of Indians lived in villages, and poverty was widespread. Food shortages were common, and milk was considered a luxury for many families. In 1950, India produced only around 17 million metric tons of milk per year, far too little for its massive population. The average person consumed only about 120 grams of milk per day, and Indians increasingly depended on foreign imports and expensive food aid to support basic nutrition. The dairy industry itself was also built on inequality. Wealthy private suppliers and middlemen controlled milk collection, pricing, and transportation. Small farmers, who did the hardest work, had almost no bargaining power. Many were forced to sell milk at unfairly low prices, while middlemen resold it to cities at much higher profits. Payments were often delayed, and milk could be rejected without explanation. Because farmers earned so little, many could not afford better feed, healthier animals, or modern equipment. The result was a vicious cycle. Poverty reduced production, and low production deepened poverty. By the 1950s and 60s, India's dairy economy was heading towards disaster. Milk production could not keep up with population growth, rural poverty was worsening, and the gap between village farmers and urban profiteers continued to widen. Without major reform, India risked a long-term nutritional crisis and economic decline. And it was in this moment of inequality and urgency that a new movement began from a small town called Anand. Anand, Gujarat, was a town where dairy farming shaped everyday life. Milk was not just a product, it was survival. Yet the people producing it had little control over their own futures. In Anand, milk collection was dominated by a private company called Polson Dairy, which held a near monopoly. Farmers were forced to sell to Polson because they had no other reliable buyer. The company controlled prices, transportation, and access to markets. Farmers were paid extremely low rates, while milk was sold in cities at a much higher profit. Payments were often delayed, and milk could be rejected without clear reasons. The farmers were treated as replaceable, even though their families depended completely on dairy income. The system was designed so that wealth flowed upward, from villages to corporations, from farmers to middlemen. Polson and private buyers defended this system by claiming they provided order and stable supply for cities, but that stability depended on keeping farmers powerless and underpaid. During World War II, demand for milk increased to support British military needs. But instead of improving farmers' lives, the demand intensified exploitation. Middlemen and private suppliers gained more control, while farmers remained trapped in poverty. This deepened the class divide between those who produced milk and those who profited from it. Eventually, farmers across Anand reached a breaking point. They began protesting and refusing to sell milk at unfair prices. Their struggle gained attention from leaders such as Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who believed that true freedom meant more than independence from Britain. It also meant freedom from economic exploitation. What began as a local protest soon became the start of a revolutionary idea. Farmers would no longer beg for fair treatment. They would build a system where they owned the industry themselves. In 1946, Anand's farmers made a decision that changed Indian history. They refused to sell their milk to Polson Dairy. Instead of accepting exploitation, they organized. With encouragement from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, farmers created a cooperative system where the producers themselves would own and control the dairy supply chain. This was not just reform, it was revolution because it attacked the very structure of rural inequality. The farmers formed the Kaira District Milk Producers Union, which later became the foundation of Amul. Under this model, profits no longer flowed to private corporations. They returned directly to the people who produced the milk. The cooperative also created stability. Milk collection became more reliable, pricing became fairer, and farmers were paid on time. To modernize the system, the cooperative brought in a young engineer named Dr. Verghese Kurian. What was meant to be temporary work became his life's mission. Kurian helped strengthen processing, refrigeration, and quality control so the cooperative could simply help protect against private suppliers. He once summarized the goal of the movement simply: India's place in the sun would come from the villages. In the villages, trust began to grow. Farmers saw that the cooperation could protect them. What started as a strike became a permanent system of reform. Anand was no longer just a town, it became a blueprint for revolution.
After the success in the Anand cooperative, the question was whether this model could even work across India and the entire country. Dr. Verghese Kurian believed it could. In the late 1960s, he became a key leader of the National Dairy Development Board, or NDDB. Then, in 1970, India launched Operation Flood, one of the country's most important agriculture programs. Operation Flood didn't rely on a government monopoly. Instead, it expanded farmer-owned cooperatives nationwide. Villagers formed local milk societies linked to district unions and state federations. The program also used technology and infrastructure to solve milk's biggest problem, spoilage. Chilling centers, processing plants, veterinary services, and transport networks moved milk safely from villages to cities. Milk powder and butter oil helped stabilize supply and prices. Some private dairies opposed the change, but supporters saw it as ending exploitation and giving farmers a fair share. The results were historic. Over 10 million farmers joined cooperatives, creating one of the largest rural development networks in the world. Dairy output rose, rural incomes improved, and farmers could reinvest in better animals and feed. What started as a rebellion in Anand became a nationwide economic revolution. The White Revolution did much more than increase India's milk supply. It transformed an entire rural economy. It shifted power away from private corporations and placed it in the hands of farmers through cooperative ownership. Millions of small producers became owners instead of laborers. India reduced its dependency on imports and strengthened its food security. What began as a farmers' movement in Anand grew into a nationwide reform of how milk was produced, sold, and profited from. Most importantly, it was proved that poverty was not inevitable when cooperation replaced exploitation. The growth was dramatic. In 1950, India produced about 17 million metric tons of milk. Over the decade, that number rose rapidly. By the late 1990s, India had surpassed the United States to become the world's largest milk producer. Today, it produces over 200 million metric tons each year. This wasn't just economic progress, it was social and political change, as millions of rural families gained stable incomes and bargaining power. For urban consumers, milk became affordable, reliable, and safe. Something that once had been scarce became a part of everyday life. Through Operation Flood and the Anand cooperative model, India became a global example of rural development. Other nations even studied the system as proof that farmer-owned cooperatives could compete with private corporations. At the center of this transformation was Amul. Its consistent quality and affordable prices made milk accessible nationwide. Its famous advertisements, especially the Amul Girl, built a strong national identity around the cooperative movement. But beyond the ads was something deeper. Millions of farmers sharing ownership in a powerful system. Although some regions like Gujarat advanced faster and challenges such as debt and high feed costs remain, the legacy continues today through White Revolution 2.0. The White Revolution was not just about milk. It was about dignity, self-reliance, and reforming an unequal system.